Yesterday, I lost a really good friend of 29 years, Greg Schimizzi. This is my tribute. I met Greg in 1992. I'd started working at the Dearborn Civic Center in Dearborn, Michigan, and he was a weekend manager. And he was a very nice, jolly, easygoing, middle-aged guy that, like myself, was Italian, so we bonded instantly. He had a lot of old dad jokes, many that I use to this day. He's got a few jokes that really crack me up, and they're timeless. And he was very, very kind, to say the least. Anybody that knew Greg Schimizzi. And always positive. Always had a good word to say, always had a word of encouragement. And he, like myself, shared a love and a passion for the wrestling business. And at the time, there wasn't internet or anything, so you would get what was called the dirt sheets. So I would get the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and he would get the Pro Wrestling Torch. And so we decided to make copies for each other every week when I would see him on Saturday mornings. And it started very early, 5:30 a.m. shift. And, he'd be there already, and he always did something. He had a large Dunkin' Donuts coffee, or Mr. Donut coffee, and a couple of donuts for me. Would never take money for it, and every Saturday, that was his MO. He already had a copy of the Pro Wrestling Torch, stapled, and in a folder for me. I mean, just everything was first class with this guy. He had a full-time job at the time as head of security at the Hyatt Regency Hotel, and this was his weekend gig, and he'd been working, I believe, at the Dearborn Civic Center since he was a teenager. So he was, middle-aged, 40s, and living in Dearborn, and was just a wrestling fanatic. Anything wrestling, he consumed it. And it was great because I was obsessed with wrestling and obsessed with becoming a professional wrestler. So I was just out of high school working this job, and I had a friend that was as crazy obsessed with me as me with professional wrestling. And he encouraged me as I continued to look for wrestling schools as a way to get into the wrestling business. We would go through magazines and newsletters and things trying to find wrestling schools because there weren't a lot of them. And I remember, telling him that it was my dream to get into the wrestling business, and he thought, oh, that would be unbelievable, you'd be great, all this stuff. And, I just continued to look for an in, and I finally got the in and went to wrestling school, would tell him, the ins and outs and who I was meeting and all these things, and he was over the top excited for me and very supportive. And we continued to make copies of the wrestling sheets for each other. We talk about the stories in it every week, and he became not only a friend, but also in some regards a father figure, because he, was older than me, and he had lived through enough life, and, pretty much was, just take it a day at a time, find, something to laugh at no matter what's going on, keep a good sense of humor, and, don't get all uptight about anything, just chill out, enjoy life, respect people, and, above all else, something I saw in him was the kindness, the generosity. The man was like a walking example of a really good person, a really good friend. I got to know a lot of his family as well, and they were basically very much like Greg, very kind, funny, compassionate, good people. And when I got into the wrestling business and really started to make a move and had, some connections, Greg had talked a little bit about, wanting to be in the wrestling business. And, I was starting to work for Malcolm Monroe Sr. Big Daddy No Money, Malcolm Monroe. And I asked Greg, I said, would you ever want to be in the business? Would you want to be, because he talked about, he always knew the times of matches, because he would sit in his seat and time keep. And he may have even done it here and there when a independent show didn't have a timekeeper. I think, they knew that he kept times. So, the promoter would say, hey, Schimizzi, do you have the times for the shows? Because he would have a stopwatch and do all this stuff just as a paying fan. And I said, you need to be an actual timekeeper. You would be amazing. And so he got his in and started timekeeping. And little by little, the wrestling business got to see that side of Schimizzi that I knew and loved and adored about him. And I knew that he would do very well in the wrestling business, because he was such an asset in so many ways. He was an encourager. He would help however he could help. He was always very respectful, and he did his job, perfectly. There's probably, if there's unknown heroes of wrestling, and there's always those guys that they'll never make it to the main stage, but guys in the business universally know who they are, and their names are held in high regard and respected. And Greg Schimizzi will always be one of those guys. If you're looking around for tributes or you see anything on him, I guarantee you there won't be an ill word spoke of this man. Anybody who was in the wrestling business and was in the Midwest will know exactly who this guy is, because he stands out. He's different. He's special. And once I left the wrestling business, we had a little bit of contact, not as much as we should have. We went to breakfast several times. He would give me a call here and there. He came to my wedding, and if I had still been in the wrestling world and hadn't went into another business, we definitely would have continued to, connect at that wrestling level. But, married, kids, all these things, and life gets really busy. And it's always one of those things where you mean to make the phone call, you mean to do this and that, and, I'll get around to it. And then you realize, time passes by, and it's a month, it's a year, it's 2 years later, and you still haven't kept in touch. And that's unfortunately the way life is sometimes. The last really good conversation I got to have with Schimizzi was at the XICW show at Cobo Center in Detroit, when I was wrestling a retirement match with Andy Muscat. And I got to go back and forth with Schimizzi and revisit some fun times, and it was awesome. It was really cool to reconnect with him. And I could see that then, his health was starting to fail him a little bit. Didn't have the same spunk that he had before, but it's a little older now. And the very last time that I got to see him, unfortunately, was a little under 2 years ago, in Lincoln Park, where he used to drive us to shows to watch the Sheik, Sabu, all of these shows. And it was he was declining still, but was still in amazing spirits. And it was like old times. A year could pass, 5 years could pass, and when I saw Schimizzi, it was like I'd seen him the previous weekend. And I was glad to be a part of bringing him to the wrestling business and letting all of the guys and girls involved get to know an incredible man. And it would have been an injustice for him not to be in the wrestling business, because he loved it. And you could put him up there with anybody in the business who's a Hall of Famer or is an unsung hero that just loves to be around professional wrestling. And Schimizzi was one of those guys that no matter who he came into contact with, there was a bond with that person. So, like so many others in the wrestling business that have passed, it's always sad and it's always hard to take, but I appreciated Greg. He was invaluable in so many ways to me, and an incredibly special man. He will be missed, and he will be remembered. Rest in peace, my friend.